Good afternoon. Do me a favor, since you're now starting to, we should never talk about sleep disorders just before I speak. Stand up for 1 second. Come on, stand up. Don't go anywhere, but stand up, shake your arms around, do that all kind of stuff, because you got to listen to me for the next 40 minutes, and that's a long time. Oh yeah, okay, don't bitch. All right, good. Sit down. Thank you. This morning's discussion dealt with those sort of physical aspects of things that I'd learned in the department. This is about the psychological aspects of things that I've learned. And again, we have a good spectrum of age in here, and I'm sure those of you who are my age, who have been doing this sort of thing for 40 years, will understand what's going on. Lord, what fools these mortals be. That was Puck's comment in A Midsummer Night's Dream. I agree with Puck completely. We deceive ourselves. We are our own worst enemies. We few. We should be happy few. We band of brothers. This is Henry V. This is what he said in the St. Crispin's Day speech before the battle at Agincourt, as they are held together by their Englishness against the French. So what's this lecture about? That's a very good question. When Mel asked me to do this, I had to think a little bit, but I want to tell you a story about what I think it's about, and that's the child on the merry-go-round. I'm sure you've all been. How many people have children? Hands up. And you've all been to a merry-go-round with those kids, and every time they come around, they wave at you, don't they? And every time you wave back. What's happened at that moment in time is they've sent you a signal, which is, I need reassurance that you will be there for me. And to not wave back would be immensely cruel. You always do. Our lives are like that. We are on a merry-go-round of type, and we are communicating and need to hear from certain people all the time that we're doing okay. And you need to send that message just as much as you receive it, you send it. This will be an allegorical journey as well as a physical one. Let's have some rules. What's said in this meeting is for emergency doctors and not the general public. The general public does not understand medical humor. I was sent one time many years ago. 3 doctors at Bayer Hospital were sent to, I don't know whether it was some big civic group in town, where they got to ask doctors questions. And for reasons that I don't even understand, one woman asked me this question: Dr. Henry, on TV or in the movies, whenever a child is being born, they ask someone to boil water. What's that for? And I said, well, if the baby dies, you could make soup. See, you think that's funny. They didn't, okay? Shit, I answered letters about that for 2 years. Emergency physicians view the world differently. Why? That's because we've seen the worst of suffering. It's very tough to impress an emergency doctor with your pain, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Your family comes to you and they want sympathy. Say, what's the matter? I say, well, rub a little dirt in it. It'll be okay. Try a little cold. Try a little heat. But it's very hard to get us, because we've seen the worst, to give that sympathy. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. Auden, Musée des Beaux-Arts. That's right. You're probably a real emergency doctor if, remember Jeff Foxworthy, you're probably a redneck if. Well, you're probably a real emergency doctor if you automatically calculate the free skin to tattoo ratio and know how many Percocet they want. The more you see of people, again, the more you admire dogs. You know that no matter how sick a kid looked at home, they will look fine in the emergency department, and mother still wants antibiotics. It's just one of those things. You use stupid phrases like the 24-hour stomach flu, knowing that you can't look that disease up in a book. Is that right? But we say that all the time. You know that if they come back the next day, you will have to diagnose them as having the 48-hour stomach flu. Any combination of terminal fibromyalgia, interstitial cystitis, chronic low back pain, lifelong migraines, and irritable bowel syndrome means that you will never figure out what they have or make them happy. Okay? You start using phrases to describe what you don't understand that begin with, "we see that." As soon as you start using that phrase, it means you don't understand, you just don't know what the answer is. And by the way, you realize all bleeding stops eventually. These are views that emergency physicians just seem to hold. You realize your job is 10% science, and I'm perfectly happy to admit I've made a career out of 8th grade science, 40% social work, and 50% begging people to do what they should do anyway. That's my career. That's what it is. Who we really are, and I believe this to the core of my soul. We are the last group of doctors who deserve to carry the staff of Asclepius. Right? When I was president of the college, I got interviewed by a woman from the New York Times who had an attitude. And she wanted to sort of beat us up on this and that. And she used this phrase. She said, "You're a rich man, aren't you, Dr. Henry?" I just looked at her and said, "Rich only in the knowledge that in my entire career I'd never refused anybody medical care based on their ability to pay." All of a sudden, she didn't have any more questions. All real emergency doctors have attention deficit syndrome. We've reinforced that, and of course, Mel is the prototype emergency doctor. We want to move the meat, keep it simple, make it fun, move. But the one thing we have over the rest of the world is we see humans as they are, not the way we would like them to be. You know, I occasionally have to talk to a resident or something and say, "You know what, Mrs. So-and-so, who you're so mad at, actually when she's cleaned up and she's not in the middle of crisis, actually not a bad person." But we see people at their very worst, and there's no question that it affects the way we act. Patience and humor. Patients don't come to us for judgment, ladies and gentlemen. They come to us for care. Judgment is the province of the Lord. But patients are still pretty funny. And there's no question there needs to be a room in the back where you go to tell these funny stories and laugh like hell. There's no question about it. You need it. Dark humor does it. As we pointed out earlier today, dogs only eat homework and prescriptions for Vicodin. Humor is emotional chaos remembered in tranquility. At the time, it wasn't very funny. Everything is funny as long as it happens to someone else, and usually in our business it does, doesn't it? We get to see various things, and it's happened to another person. Let me tell you about Timmy. Timmy was a guy a chronic alcoholic, who I'd seen for years and years and years. And you know those guys who would come in and you knew you were going to see them about every weekend. Well, I had in one bed, like a 19-year-old college student, someone who drank only on weekends, binge sorts of things at fraternities. And he was in there, yelling and screaming and doing this, that, and other thing. We were having to strap him down. And Timmy, who's in the bed next door, right next to him, yells out, "Hey, kid, shut up." And then he says again, "Shut up." And I said, "Timmy, what's the problem?" He says, "I hate those young drunks." I said, "Why?" Because he says it gives us old drunks a bad name. What about Darvon Williams? It's the second baby I ever delivered at Detroit, at the Wayne County General Hospital. The mother liked the name of the pain medicine she was taking. So somewhere in Detroit is a 42-year-old guy named Darvon Williams. The doctor and humility. Pride does cometh before the fall, and we have a lot of it for a lot of reasons. Did we all work pretty hard? Yes, we did. Were we put on a pedestal by people for some of the things we did? Absolutely. And we take it very badly when we're questioned. You know, the lawsuit to the guy who runs a business, the usual kinds of business lawsuits, it's just business. It isn't to you and I. A lawsuit to us, malpractice suit, is an attack on our very core and person of being. If you said to me, "Greg, you're sort of like a shit father," I'd say, "What's your point?" If you said you're a miserable husband, I'd say, "Let's have a drink." But don't you ever call me a bad doctor, because now you're getting personal. You ever think about that? And if it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending soul alive. That's right. I take it seriously, and I take it hard. And I think a lot of us are that way. There is a curse to fighter-pilot mentality. What is that? We can be wrong, but a good ER doc can't be in doubt. You got to take limited information and move on it. And, you know, sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, but it's the emergency doc who can't move everybody hates. The guy who has to order more tests, and when those are back, they order more tests, even if they don't tell you the answer. The nurses will take those guys out and slap them to death. You understand that. But that's where we are. By the way, it does build up in us in a psychology, when particularly we've had a good run of cases, our own greatness. I identify myself, am I married? Yeah, 46 years. Do I have kids? Yeah, 3 of them. But I'm Dr. Henry. In my dreams, I call myself Dr. Henry. Well, actually, I call myself Dr. Henry, but that's all right. But too late he learned that being a doctor was just another way of making a living. The Spoon River Anthology. There is an importance to being friends with your patients, and all of us have learned that. The chronics know us. They like us, a lot of them. We have a way of relating to them. We don't berate them. We don't do this or that. They're sort of friendly in the whole big thing. I can always remember one time I was seeing, again, another young, very intoxicated person, and a guy who I've seen for years is sitting there, and he's huge. He's the size of an oak tree. And this kid's yelling and screaming, and he just said, "Doc, can I beat the shit out of him for you?" And I said, "No, I can't let you do that, but thanks for the offer." You know, because there may be a time when I'm going to actually take you up on that. You're going to meet a woman now who will be important in this story. That's my mother. Half Dane, half Swede immigrant, went to the 8th grade. And I'm at a party in Ann Arbor, at somebody's house, and Francis Collins is there. For those of you who don't know Francis Collins, he was the head of the Human Genome Project. He's on the short list for the Nobel Prize. He used to be a doc at the University of Michigan, so he hangs around Ann Arbor a lot, and we were talking. And I can see my mother, who I brought to the party, over in a corner, and she's got Frances Collins pinned. Again, this is a woman who went to the 8th grade, an immigrant woman. So I kind of walk over to try and save Frances Collins. In my arrogance, I said, Mom, I'm sure Dr. Collins would love to get on. And France, France, who I've known for years, looked at me and said, Greg, your mother's just telling me all the wonderful things you're doing. I said, oh my God. She's talking about me to the guy who's going to get the Nobel Prize for the Human Genome Project. And I said, Mom, do you know who this is and stuff like that? I'm not the guy to be talked about. She says, yes, you are. You're my son. The funny thing is, on the way out there, she and Frances Collins are having this intense discussion about science and religion. And on the way out the door, Frances Collins said to me, Greg, can I have your mother's phone number? I had misjudged the entire situation. He was enjoying his time with my mom, and she didn't need any saving. John Cougar Mellencamp once sang, life goes on long after the thrill of living is gone. I honestly believe in the middle of our careers, we often wander into this territory. We haven't found those new things which bring spark every day. Do you all remember that first day or week in medical school? How everything was interesting, how everything excited you, how everything was wonderful. We need to keep that. My teaching is how I keep it. You are how I keep it. You give me a lot more than I've ever given you, and I want to be honest about it. If man is the measure of all things, how do we know what's important in anyone's life? Remember, Protagoras said that man is the measure of all things. How do we know whether we're doing things that are right? Have you ever had that day where I'm not sure I helped anybody today? Oh no, I've had those days I go home and think of those 30 or so people I saw. I'm not sure anybody is any better off because I was there. I did save a guy once, though, for sure. I was working in Saginaw, Michigan. A young kid, 19-year-old black kid, was involved in, let's say, the unauthorized taking of monies from a convenience store. As part of the arrest, he was hit across the forehead, and so they brought him in, police brought him in to be sewn up. So I'm sewing on him. Our deputy has gone next door to visit with one of the nurses. This kid looks around, and he's got to be 6'2", 6'3". He's big and he's strong. And it's me with him. And he wasn't handcuffed at the time. So he kind of pushes me to the side when I inject him with a needle, jumps up. The deputy came around the corner, and in those days they carried 44s. Now, I don't know whether you know what that is. But that's like a damn cannon. It's like having a handheld howitzer. He cocked that gun and put it against the kid's head and said, "Do you want me to shoot him, Doc?" Now, I don't know to this day whether he would have actually did it. But all of a sudden, this black kid turns white. So did I. And what I said was, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I can remember the clicks in my head because it's a double click, a double action. And he cocked that gun. And I said, we're all going to rethink this. I said, you're going to uncock that gun, and young man, you're going to lay back down. You know, that's as good as anything I ever did in my entire career. We don't always save somebody. The number of patients, Jerry Hoffman was right in that, the number that we actually, quote unquote, save, the great saves, are relatively few. I consider that as good a save as I've ever had. By the way, we are asked to do things no one else in medicine ever performs. I was working one night, and the nurses asked me, at St. Joseph Mercy Hospital, Ann Arbor, Michigan. One of the nurses said, "Come in, this gal is she was delivering a stillbirth. Child was probably at least 32 weeks or so, quite dead. I do the delivery, I'm cleaning things up. Nurse comes out and sees me and said, she'd like you to baptize the child. Well, I'd been an acolyte, an altar boy in my career. I knew the words to say, and I went in and I did that. I do baptize thee in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I had the strangest feeling come over me I've never had before or since. I don't know what that was. But you know, the dermatologist, the anesthesiologist, they're not asked to do things like that very much. I was probably after all, I couldn't do anything for her physically that I hadn't done, and I couldn't do anything for that child. But she cried and hugged me and thanked me for doing that. Now, the nurses had already notified the God Squad. You all have a God Squad, right? Certainly if you're a Catholic hospital, you got a God Squad. It's mandatory. So one of the priests came in and said, you know, what happened? He said, who baptized the child? They said, Henry. And he just goes, oh, Jesus. And so he's required to bless me. You know, it's sort of a union shop thing, you know. But he and I talked about that afterwards, and we still do. The function of the letters is to know when to abuse them. And now the story grows dark. I tell you a story of which I'm embarrassed and ashamed. I'm working by our hospital, 1 doc, 3 nurses, 1 desk clerk. A bus in Michigan, winter, ice. The bus goes off the road, and they're bringing us about 16 kids who are on the bus. And I'm by myself. So I'm going to have to move that meat and go from room to room to room to decide if anybody really needs immediate intervention. What else can you do? And I walked into one room, and the mother had arrived, very charming woman, mother sitting there, and there's a little boy, and I start saying, are you hurt? Are you hurt any place? And he's not talking to me, and I just said to Mom, is there something the matter with him? And I looked back and realized he had Down syndrome. And then I looked back at her, and she had tears in her eyes. That was the worst thing I've ever done to another human. I inflicted pain that day for no reason. And I was such a miserable coward that I did not go back into that room and beg her forgiveness. But I went on with my work. I let down 3 groups that day. I let down the ancient tradition of medicine. Into what house I shall enter, it shall be for the benefit of the sick. And I did not do that. I let down all of you that day, my colleagues, and I was about to be president of the American College. You needed a better person. A Mel Herbert wouldn't have made that mistake. A Billy Mallon wouldn't have made that mistake. I made it. God, forgive me my sin. But let me tell you who I really let down that day. Remember that half Swede, half Dane woman we met earlier, my mom? The biggest day in her whole life, the realization of the promise of America, was the day I got my MD degree. She couldn't have been prouder. I'm glad she never saw what happened that night. I'm so sorry, Mom. You deserved a better kid. If you want to hate me for it, don't bother. I hate myself for it every day. A good day is when I do not see a child with Downs. A good night is when I do not feel that woman's tears against my cheek. God forgive me my sin. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. The tempest. The tempest is the play within the play, just like our lives are a play within a play. The question is, do we just live for today? If we just live for today, maybe I didn't commit a huge sin. But if we have perspective on our lives, where it was going, my behavior was unforgivable. I have a proposal for a Latin motto for emergency medicine. I'm big into Latin. The three sempers of the Roman soldier. Semper idem. Semper paratus. Semper fidelis. Semper idem is always even-keeled, always ready to respond. Semper paratus is prepared by training and experience to act. Semper fidelis, as all you Marines know, is faithful. We should be faithful to the basis that medicine exists. On the ancient shield of medicine, there are three symbols: the eye of the eagle, the hand of the woman, the heart of the lion. Sometimes it's incumbent upon us to take our lion's heart, shove it into our lion's throat, and give a roar in defense of the patient. I did not do it that day. So, Benedictus Sint Finis, I come to this end. But I want you to remember really who we are. We are the watchmen on that great tower. We watch people move in and out of health care. We should be the protectors of that area of the city, no matter how tough or mean, where when they enter our place, there is no prejudice here. There is only decency and understanding and care. That's what we want. At some point in time, we all pass through Flamantium Monia Mundi, the flaming ramparts of the world, to enter the terra incognita, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. Let us do it with honor and dignity. And I beg of you, don't make the mistake that I made. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sort of retiring from essentials today, and I want you to know how important it has been to have you pay me the great honor of inviting me, even knowing my sins. Thank you so much.